Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. Well, I don't know if he's showing up. I know he would like me to be there, said U.S. President Donald Trump about Vladimir Putin's presence at the Ukraine-Russia meeting set to take place in Istanbul on Thursday. What shape will the final meeting actually take? We'll have more on that in just a moment, but first, let's take a look at the latest headlines. EU agrees on a 17th package of sanctions, which expands existing measures to add greater economic pressure on Russia. Donald Trump continues tightening partnerships while on tour in the Middle East. The U.S. administration revoked the AI diffusion rule, which limited the sales of AI microchips. It has now been 3 days since Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy said he would meet Russia's Vladimir Putin in Istanbul. Despite pressure from Europe and encouragement from the White House, the Kremlin has remained quiet about the Russian leader's plans to attend. Our correspondent Alex Kadier is in Istanbul for us. Good evening, Alex. So what are we expecting in the next 24 hours?
Well, good evening from the Bosphorus. It is where Europe meets Asia, but is not yet where Vladimir Putin will meet President Zelenskyy of Ukraine. We still do not know what the Kremlin is planning. Volodymyr Zelenskyy of Ukraine saying that he would meet President Putin in Istanbul tomorrow if he comes. The plan for now is that President Zelenskyy will go to Ankara to meet with the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Then and only then, if Vladimir Putin travels here to Istanbul, will the Ukrainian leader come here to meet him. There were rumors that perhaps Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, would come. That has been denied in Russian media. But the linchpin, the thing that could make the difference, the person that can make the difference, of course, is President Donald J. Trump. He was speaking to reporters a little earlier today on Air Force One about that meeting. Let's have a listen to what he said.
I don't know if he's showing up. I know he would like me to be there. And that's a possibility. If we could end the war, I'd be thinking about that. Now, tomorrow, we're all booked out. You understand that? We're all set.
But you'd go if he
We're
goes?
going to go UAE tomorrow. And so we have a very full situation. Now, that doesn't mean I wouldn't do it to save a lot of lives and come back. But, yeah, I think they're thinking about something. I don't know that he would be there if I'm not there. We're going to find out. Marco's going. And Marco's been very effective.
Well, that is what Donald Trump feels about the situation. Maybe Vladimir Putin will know. If the leader of the free world doesn't know whether or not he's coming, it'll be difficult for any of us to know that as well. But we will monitor this very closely in the hours overnight, in the early hours of tomorrow, to see if there is a change in position from the Kremlin. But for now, Volodymyr Zelenskyy of Ukraine has made a step towards peace. Vladimir Putin of Russia has not stepped out of Moscow.
Thank you so much. That's Alex Kadier reporting live from Istanbul. And this very moment, joining us now is also our Ukraine correspondent, Oz Karaji, to help us understand the Ukrainian perspective when it comes to tomorrow's meeting. Good evening, Oz. So what is the mood like in Ukraine ahead of the meeting set to take place tomorrow in Istanbul? Are there any official responses to what we've seen so far?
Well, the Ukrainians are still unsure what exactly is happening. A diplomatic source to Reuters said everything will depend on whether Putin is scared of coming to Istanbul or not. Based on his response, the Ukrainian leadership will decide the next steps. So it's unclear what's going to happen. It's still not any clearer from Moscow whether they're intending to send Putin. It seems that that's not going to happen. The question will still be, what will world leaders, European leaders, the United States do in response to Putin empty chairing the position that he asked for? He asked for these peace talks. He initiated them, and he is now not showing up to the talks that he called for. Zelenskyy has released a statement on Wednesday evening saying the answers to all of the questions about this war, why it started, why it continues, all of the answers are in Moscow. How the war will end depends on the world. Ukraine is ready for any format of negotiations, and we are not afraid of meetings tomorrow in Turkey. So that's still the official Ukrainian position issued within the last hour. The question really is, what does Moscow do next?
Thank you so much. That was Oz Karaji reporting live from Kyiv. So we had Oz Karaji in Kyiv and Alex Kadier in Istanbul. Thank you so much for joining. And we're moving on. Sweden is open to the possibility of sending peacekeeping troops to Ukraine in an event of a ceasefire, confirmed Pål Jonson, the Swedish defense minister, in an exclusive interview with TVP World. Let's hear what he had to say.
Would Sweden send troops, peacekeeping troops, in the case of a ceasefire?
Yeah, well, we don't exclude that possibility, and of course we participated in this coalition of the willing meetings, and we have said there's three conditions that has to be met. One is some sort of U.S. engagement into such a mission, and then it's important that there has a clear rules of engagement, so we know what the exact purpose of it would be, and then of course it's also important that we take into account NATO's other activities for deterrence and defense as well. But if these conditions are met, then Sweden could certainly consider contributing.
Stay with us here on TVP World for the Swedish official's full interview for On the Record, calling the war in Ukraine, quote, the security challenge of our generation, coming up next after World News Tonight. The EU's 17th sanction package targeting Russia is one step closer to becoming a reality. The new round of restrictions is touted to be the toughest one yet, targeting those already circumventing the bloc's surveillance. But with 6 days before the package is finalized, many are wondering whether the Hungarians will block the measures. And so we are joined live now by Angela Skujins from Brussels. Angela, good evening. We are hearing a lot of rhetoric about this package, which is supposed to drain the Kremlin's economy and put pressure on that country's leader to reach a ceasefire deal with Ukraine. Is it going to happen?
Yes, so the official line from the Belgian capital, the officials here, is that it will make a difference. It will bring the Kremlin to its knees and put pressure on Russian President Vladimir Putin as he is meant to go to Turkey to hammer out those ceasefire negotiations. We heard from European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen that the pressure needs to be maintained on Moscow. These warm words were echoed by the EU's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, which posted a status on social media platform X. Let's take a listen to what she said.
We are upping the pressure on Russia to end its war. I welcome the agreement on the 17th package of sanctions. It will target more of Russia's shadow fleet, which is illegally shipping oil for revenues to fund Putin's aggression. Sanctions drain Russia's war chest.
Yes, so those 27 ambassadors from those EU member states agreed on that deal today, which includes almost 200 names of individuals operating those shadow fleet vessels, as well as those accused of human rights violations. But we have heard scepticism, particularly from experts in the Belgian capital. This includes Matthew Sussex, a foreign interference expert at the Australian National University, who said for these measures really to bite and take hold as they're designed to, those secondary sanctions which have been touted from Washington as well as Canada need to be implemented immediately. Let's take a listen to what he had to say in exclusive comments to TVP World.
It's going to be necessary for a broader base sanctions package for it to be effective, to be agreed not just between the EU members but also by the United States, by Canada and by others in order to prevent the Kremlin from effectively being able to circumvent sanctions on the energy sector as well as dual-use technologies.
But it's not the end of the road for this 17th sanction package. It needs to be finalised on the 20th of May by those foreign ministers, and questions certainly loom regarding which way the Hungarian Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó, which way he will vote. In the previous months, he has threatened to torpedo the rollover of economic sanctions against Russia, with that country's Prime Minister Viktor Orban making good on this threat at a recent European Council summit in Brussels. So all eyes will be on this date, as well as what will happen to those 200 billion euros in frozen Russian state assets currently held up in Belgium. But that's all from Brussels. I'll send it back to you in Warsaw.
Thank you so much, Angela. That was Angela Skujins reporting from Brussels. Donald Trump is on tour of the largest Middle Eastern countries, having already signed an arms deal in Saudi Arabia upon his meeting with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The trip is going so well for the U.S. president that he also announced plans to lift sanctions on Syria after a first face-to-face meeting between a U.S. president and a Syrian leader in 25 years. But what will be the impact of Trump's visit on Europe? Kazimierz Wysiak has this report.
This handshake says more than 100 words. For the first time in decades, a US president has met with a Syrian leader face-to-face. During his visit to Saudi Arabia, President Donald Trump took a major step towards normalizing relations with Syria.
After discussing the situation with Crown Prince Mohammed and President Erdogan of Turkey, I am also ordering the cessation of sanctions against Syria to give them a fresh start. It gives them a chance for greatness. The sanctions were really crippling, very powerful.
And this decision was welcomed with cheers on the streets of Damascus. The country, ravaged by a deadly civil war for more than a decade, is now well on its way to returning to the international stage. The fall of the Bashar al-Assad regime and the lifting of sanctions by the US has now created a window of opportunity for Europe as well.
Europeans, when the sanctions will be lifted, will have much more leverage over Syria by means of funds for reconstruction, by means of foreign aid or reconstruction funds or trade.
The Assad regime had been supported by Russia and Iran for years. Now that it's gone, President Trump sees an opportunity to boost his own allies in the Middle East.
President Trump encouraged President al-Shara to do a great job for the Syrian people and urged him to sign onto the Abraham Accords with Israel, tell all foreign terrorists to leave Syria, deport Palestinian terrorists, help the United States to prevent the resurgence of ISIS, and assume responsibility for ISIS detention centers.
Trump has also signed a robust $600 billion agreement with Saudi Arabia, obligating the Saudis to invest that money in the United States. This coincided with the OPEC Plus countries drastically increasing their oil output by a whopping 411,000 barrels per day. That's equivalent to 3 monthly increments. All of that is expected to lower the prices of fuel in Central Eastern Europe, even if not immediately.
That was for many times suggested by President Trump that OPEC should do it. We can read it as Saudi Arabia should do it, should produce more to make the prices lower.
And Trump is not slowing down with the visits and deals in the region. In Qatar, Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani signed an agreement with the US leader for the purchase of Boeing passenger jets for $200 billion. A trip of deals and agreements which could have an impact all over the world. For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Wysiak.
Tuesday brought a major change in the global and Polish technology sector. The new U.S. administration revoked the AI diffusion rule introduced by former U.S. President Joe Biden in January, which was supposed to take effect on May 15th. The rule would have limited export restrictions on AI chips. This is a welcome change, as in the words of the Polish Minister of Digital Affairs, microchips are the gold of the 21st century. Sonia Gatabiszczan reports.
A number of countries, including Poland, let out a sigh of relief as the United States Department of Commerce revoked Joe Biden's AI diffusion rule on Tuesday, effectively deciding to lift export restrictions on AI chips.
We are pleased that the administration recognizes that the AI diffusion rule would undermine U.S. diplomatic relations with dozens of countries by downgrading them to second-tier status.
The rule, introduced by the former U.S. president in January and originally meant to take effect on May 15th, divided countries around the world into 3 tiers. Tier 1 countries could receive unlimited chips. Approximately 120 countries in Tier 2, including Poland, would be subject to a cap, whereas Tier 3 countries like Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran would be prevented from getting American chips.
We could buy only the limited amounts. They were limited to 15,000 by batch and to 45,000 a year, since I remember. If you try to build a data center, you need thousands of CPUs.
The Polish government successfully fought for the removal of restrictions to import chips and microprocessors to Poland. The development of AI and the digital market is guaranteed. This is a good decision by Donald Trump's administration because it guarantees the faster development of all countries in the European Union.
The Biden administration asserted that the regulation was meant to, among other things, quote, keep advanced AI models out of the hands of malicious actors. Chip makers such as NVIDIA and AMD opposed the proposed restrictions, and their share prices increased last week after Donald Trump's administration signaled it would reconsider the regulation.
We might be doing that, yeah.
I am happy because microchips are the gold of the 21st century, indispensable for super-quick computers to develop artificial intelligence and to allow the country to develop economically.
The potential U.S. restrictions have prompted the EU to reevaluate its chip-making strategy, the CHIPS Act, with a focus on AI chips. For TVP World, I'm Sonia Gatabishchan.
Fears abound that foreign actors may be trying to meddle in Poland's presidential election. A leading disinformation analysis center has discovered a series of political advertisements on social media that could be funded from abroad, with certain accounts spending more on political materials in the last week than any individual campaign. It comes just days out from the first round of voting this weekend. The country's NASC research network, which oversees cybersecurity, identified the ads on Facebook and found that they intended to promote one candidate while discrediting others. According to the analysis, the ads targeted the election's three leading candidates: centrist Warsaw Mayor Rafał Trzaskowski, Eurosceptic historian Karol Nawrocki, and far-right pro-Russian Sławomir Mencen. NASC says the posts have already been reported to have been blocked, but Facebook owner Meta reportedly denies there is any evidence of foreign meddling. Last year, the first round of Romania's presidential election was annulled due to evidence pointing to Russian interference. European Commission President Antonio Costa is on a tour of Balkan countries aspiring to become part of the EU. One particular meeting stands out. On Tuesday, Costa met with Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić, despite the fact that only days before Vučić attended the Victory Day parade in Moscow against the EU's warnings. Our Balkan correspondent Paweł Trzaskowski has more on the story.
European Council President Antonio Costa continues his tour of the Western Balkans, a show of support for the countries willing to join the EU. On Wednesday, he visited Kosovo and Montenegro, and the latter is supposed to become a member of the bloc soon.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine has accelerated the process in Ukraine and Moldova, so it's not fair for the Western Balkan countries to be overtaken by Ukraine and Moldova, and it's also pushing them to move faster.
Costa's tour of the Western Balkans spans 6 countries. It will end on Friday in Albania, which is also expected to become a member of the EU soon. But it started in a country whose future in the bloc is still uncertain. Serbia. In Belgrade, Antonio Costa met with the country's president Aleksandar Vučić, the very same who just a couple of days earlier attended the Victory Day parade in Moscow, despite explicit warnings from the EU not to do so.
I believe that there will be consequences, but that there will be consequences only for me personally.
And although attending the parade was acknowledged during the meeting with Costa,
President Costa spoke openly with me about the trip to Moscow and about all other issues. And of course, I am well aware and fully understand what many in the EU think about the visit to Moscow and how they feel about it, often differently from us.
It eventually seems to have no tangible impact on the relations with the EU.
It's very important to take note about the concrete commitments took by the President and the government of Serbia to deliver on media freedom, on electoral law, on anti-corruption laws.
Under the rule of Aleksandar Vučić, Serbia has been performing a balancing act between Russia and the EU, often to the dismay of other countries in the region.
It is really difficult to explain how, month after month, the Serbian President Vučić does show to everybody that he is a through Russian proxy, copy and paste Russian playbook.
But simply asking Belgrade to finally take a stance might not be enough.
This needs to be followed with some concrete actions in case of Serbia continuing its current ambiguity with regards to Russia.
And Alexander Vučić continues to walk a fine line between Russia and the EU as he's being challenged at home by protests that have been continuing for more than half a year now. A social movement that is hard to ignore.
If people want to vote, protest, and if they go for radical change, you are not going to stop them if they're going to be a functioning, competitive electoral system.
However, for now, this is yet another area for Vučić where he seems unwilling to back down. Paweł Trzaskowski for TVP World.
On the eve of what could be a history-defining meeting in Russia's war with Ukraine, namely the Istanbul meeting, a lot yet remains unsaid. Is Vladimir Putin going to show up? Is Volodymyr Zelenskyy going to speak to Putin and Putin alone? On top of all of that, the 17th package of EU sanctions for Russia was announced as NATO foreign ministers meet in Antalya discussing defense spending. What are the chances of the talks being successful? Joining me now is my guest, Dian Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Good evening. Thank you for joining on the program.
Glad to be here.
So hopefully the meeting between Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelenskyy is supposed to take place tomorrow on Thursday. We don't know if Donald Trump will be coming. We're getting a lot of messages. What happens next, and what are your predictions when it comes to that meeting?
Well, this has been an ornate game of chess. Will he, won't he, will he do this, won't he do this? Putin is playing a game. He's just, annoying everybody. And this is all done on purpose. His whole modus operandi is to, wait out until the West gets fed up with the war. But the West is fed up with the war. And so that's why the pressure from Trump and others and Europe is very important. And the fact that Zelensky's willing to go to Turkey and wait for Putin. If Putin doesn't show up, I think that's a very big black eye for Russia, and it also will very much enrage the United States and Europe, and should.
So if Zelenskyy shows up but Putin doesn't, do you think that this will work in a way in Ukraine's advantage? I mean, is for example, Donald Trump going to change his perspective when it comes to the balance between the two?
Well, it will demonstrate that only one side wants to end the war. Putin has maintained that, he's a victim, that he didn't start the war, that he doesn't like the war, but he has done nothing to try and terminate through ceasefires or talks in any way, shape, or form. He keeps throwing up obstacles and barriers. So this is his game, and I think he's now going to confront a West that has run out of patience. And hopefully it'll be Trump and Europe as well. And there is a number of accelerating decisions they could make, such as flooding Ukraine with more weaponry, stronger weaponry, and really doubling down on sanctions even more.
What do you think would be the weight of this meeting if Vladimir Putin would not show up? Would it be in any way, shape, or form less important than it was initially supposed to be?
Well, I don't know. If he doesn't show up, then the whole peace effort that Trump has embarked on since he took office in January is for naught. It will reveal that Putin never had any sincere interest in ending the fighting and the shooting, which is Trump's goal. And so I think the ball then will be in Trump's court as well as Europe's court as to decide what to do. Now, weaponry is one thing, sanctions is another. And, Trump is just finishing off a tour in the Middle East, and it looks like he's got the agreement also as a pressure point to have the Arab oil producers, OPEC, flood more oil, almost 500,000 barrels a day, which will cut the income dramatically of Russia, which is completely based on oil exports. That's how he's financing his war. The second thing is that Europe has just concluded that it will not only increase sanctions, but it is going to go after the phantom oil ships that deliver the oil and also consider putting sanctions on anybody who buys Russian oil, such as India and China.
So let's take a look at the 17th package. We've heard that it is going to hit the, those are going to be secondary sanctions. We also heard that this is the most severe package yet. I also spoke to Stephen Moore yesterday, and he said it's not really about what the sanctions are about, it's about imposing them. Do you think that this package of sanctions has a possibility, an opportunity to actually make a difference?
Well, it depends on how much and where and by whom. Secondary sanctions, there have been some, certainly on banking and other things. But I think that really what has to be happened is not only does these phantom ships have to disappear altogether, they have to be, rounded up, rounded up, and towed back into port and stop the transmission of oil, which will cut off Putin's income. The price has to drop. OPEC should be encouraged to flood the market. And I think that the two big accessories to the war, China and India, indirect accessories, should be there should be a tariff placed on every barrel of oil they buy from Russia, and those funds should go toward Ukraine to help defend itself in increasing the warfare against Russia.
So this tour by Donald Trump of some of the bigger Middle Eastern countries and those contracts that he's signing, the one that you mentioned previously only a few minutes ago, do you think that signing of these contracts is actually going to cause some panic when it comes to Russia? Or are they going to try and reevaluate their strategy?
Contracts about what? I think they've talked about increasing their production of oil. Is that what you mean, the contracts? Because he's signed a lot of business deals with them too. Contract.
It's about the oil, the one that you mentioned before.
Yeah, no, sure, it's going to make a big difference. I mean, they don't produce. My guess is that they may produce 10% of the world's oil, but most importantly, they represent half of the export of oil. And it's the export of oil that determines its price, export price. And that is what has financed the war in Russia. So anything they can do to contribute to lowering the export price, and that will help squeeze Putin's economy even more. And then going after the oil tankers and going after the oil buyers is absolutely essential. On top of that, however, we have a shooting war, and I think that Ukraine should have access to more weaponry.
Our time is coming to an end, unfortunately, but let's look at this meeting that is taking place in Antalya very shortly. NATO foreign ministers meeting, talking about defense spending. There's been signals about 5% coming from Donald Trump of upping the defense spending. How likely the NATO countries are actually to adjust to this new ceiling when it comes to defense spending?
Well, they've been freeloading off the U.S. for many, many decades. Let's face it. So does Canada. They've got to ratchet up their spending. They're trying to do it. It's not easy. And just spending is not enough. You have to put together military armed forces with lines of command, with facilities, with equipment, with training. All kinds of things have to happen. So, yes, they're moving in that direction, and they have to, because the Americans are not going to support NATO much longer to the extent that they have. And that's very, very critical.
Thank you so much. Dian Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, was my guest. It was great to have you on the show as always. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And so this would be all for now here on World News Tonight, but please do stay tuned. We're back in just a moment with more news and features, and we'll see you there. But just before you go, remember to stay with us here on TVP World, because an interview with Ivan Karstev, political scientist, the chairman of the Center for Liberal Strategies in Sofia, will be aired at 9:17 p.m. CET. See you there.